Hey everybody, it's Regina McMichaels, and we're here to talk about how to get a seat in the C-suite. I am glad you're here. I know this is a challenge for everybody dealing with all of these changes, but hopefully we can really take a chance to get to learn what's going on about getting in the C-suite. Here's the really cool news. It is likely that we have a better chance as an industry to make a real difference and getting a seat and getting a voice heard because of everything that's been going on with the pandemic. The reality is that there's a new light being shown upon the e-learning world, the learning world in general, the safety people and all of those folks. Suddenly we're out here going, hey, we've got to do all this stuff. How do we do it? And this program actually lends itself to pushing us forward so that our executives see us even better in the safety world, because suddenly people are talking about safety. They're talking about PPE. They're talking about things that in the past we were begging them to listen to us about. So this is the great news. But here's what I want to hit on first, and that is, why don't we have a seat in the C-suite? Meaning, why don't we have chief safety officers, CSOs, chief safety officers? We have chief information officers, we have chief financial officers, we have chief everything officers, but very few companies have chief safety officers. As a matter of fact, the only place where we really see CSOs is in the healthcare world, not in the occupational safety world that we tend to work in mostly. So as a result, we might have vice presidents of safety, which is an awesome title and an awesome job and great for you for having that. But why is it that we don't have the same title as all the other people with the chief in their title? And so if you want to be at that level, if you want to be those people, then this is the program for you. And even if you don't care what your title is, even if you don't care where how far you go in the company you're at right now, what I'm going to talk to you about today is really going to matter in terms of how we can propel ourselves as safety professionals forward so that we have a better voice in the industry. So here's what I know. I've talked with executives. I've talked with safety professionals. I've talked with global leaders around the world based on the work that I've been able to do in my career. And here's some of the feedback I've gotten from all avenues, safety people, executives, and everyone else. And that is that in our profession, we've kind of done this to ourselves. We don't have the title. We don't have the influence in the corporations because we don't think like executives. And we're going to talk a little about what that means, what you should be doing, and what it means to think like an executive. The other thing is that we don't act like leaders. A lot of us, we were brought into the industry as compliance-based people. When I graduated college in the late 80s and I went to my first job out of school, I was taught to go out there and search for compliance and non-compliance. And that's what I was supposed to be doing, is I was going to have to go and figure out what rules people were breaking and that kind of stuff. And all I thought about was compliance. I didn't think about the business. I didn't think about how this fit into the grander scheme of things. And that's very challenging for people if you don't have that perspective and if no one's ever taught you to think that way. Now, one of the challenges we've got is we don't talk about business goals. We don't think about them. In some cases, we have no clue what that even means. Here's a quick test. If you work for a publicly held company, or even if it's private or government or whatever, do you have a copy or do you have access to the game plan of the organization? Do you have the annual report if your organization is doing that? If it's a government agency, they put out reports as well. It doesn't matter. But do you have a handle on where the organization is going in the future? Meaning, how can we as safety professionals do our jobs effectively if we don't know where the company is going? For example, what if your company wants to expand this year? Or what if they want to contract and focus on a different line of business? What if they want to get less employees instead of more? What if they want to get more technical? What if they want to buy out another organization? Those things are relevant to the safety person and what their future is in the company in terms of understanding where risks and hazards will be. So if your company is going in a direction that you don't even know about because either they haven't told you or you haven't taken the time to learn about it, then what does that say to the executives when you say, hey, my voice needs to to be heard. I've got something important to say. So you've got to get in there and be like an executive. You've got to be like a leader. You've got to understand what the compliance goals are. You've got to understand that balancing profit and safety together is what's going to make money. And the reality is, and let me tell you, I wish more than anything that safety was number one. I wish that safety drove everything. I wish nobody ever had to choose between safety and production. But the reality is, you do have to. And business is business. In this world right now, in the state that we're going in this virtual conference, we know if a company isn't making money, if there's not a profit, then there's no employees to protect. There's no workers to keep safe because the doors are closed. So we have to keep the business objectives clear in our minds so that we serve that as safety professionals. And I believe we can have both. I believe we can have a safe, profitable business if we're all thinking the right way and communicating the right way. Finally, I think that some safety people may have done themselves wrong, maybe a little bit, in terms of not acting as a true influencer when it comes to safety and health decision making. What are we doing in the profession to make sure that the executive level, that, whether it's the same level, it's the workforce, whether it's the executives, it doesn't matter. What are we doing to make sure that we are influencing all the right people in all the right way so that we can move that protection, move it forward so that we can take care of the people that we want to? So here's a couple of things. I want you to go find the annual report or whatever the equivalent is for your company. I want you to understand the profit margin. How many pennies do you make per widget that you make? Because if it's only 5 cents per widget and you're losing that much in workers' comp claims and other issues, then that's pretty important. And you need to communicate that with your executives, and you need to understand it first. You need to understand your iceberg ratio. And that's just a term I'm using. We've all seen the graphic. There's an iceberg and it says, here's the losses or the money lost associated with an accident. And that's what's above the water. And then what's below the water is all of the unknowns and all of the other costs that we can't easily determine, like the cost of a medical claim or something like that. Now, the reality is that ratio, that number of losses above the waterline, some people say, hey, you know what? How much we lose is a 1-to-1 ratio. And some organizations say, no, it's a 1-to-10 ratio. For every dollar of medical, there's $10 of hidden costs in that money. And some folks say, no, let's go with 1-to-4. That's probably more reasonable. Let's just say, for the sake of discussion, that we're going to go with 1-to-4 right now. If your iceberg ratio is 1-to-4, if that's what your executives go with, then if you're losing, $100,000 a year in medical claims and in direct costs, that's really almost $500,000. Now, if you're only making 5 cents a widget, how many widgets does your company make? And what does that really impact their bottom line? That's the kind of language we need to be able to talk as a safety professional. Now, if you're going, Regina, iceberg factor, ratios, profit margins, ROI, cost benefit analysis, yikes, those aren't things I know yet. Find a business mentor. Find someone who can help you learn these things. We all had to. No one's born with this knowledge. We've all had to learn it along the way. Take a business class at the local community college. Are you friends with the CFO of the company? Do you have a connection with the finance department or the accounting division at all? And if so, is there someone there that you can talk to that will help you understand some of this stuff? Now, the other thing you want to do is not just understand business from the truly numbers perspective, but you also have to know, how does the company you work for, or the company you may want to work for, how do they walk the walk? Who are they? Are they an executive organization where everyone wears suits, or is everyone casual? It's casual Friday every day. Is it a construction company, or is it a tech company? Is it old school, business profit and business ideals, or is it more of a younger entrepreneurial feel? Why does that matter? Because as the safety person, you have to understand the culture of the organization so that you are part of that. Simple example. Had a colleague years ago in the construction industry, and he worked for a very large contractor, but he was in the field. So working in the field, protecting people in the field, he had work boots on. He had jeans. He had a hard hat. That's what he wore to work every day, and that's how he interacted, keeping people safe in the field. But he wanted to start moving up in the company, and I said, you can't go there and in your work boots and in your hard hat and walk into the corporate office and expect them to listen to you when you look like you only know what's happening in the field. Doesn't matter how smart you are. If the perception's not there, we need to make sure that they get that information from us and that they believe in the information that we have. And so I told him, I said, you need to, clean up your hair and ditch the work boots and put on a pair of dress shoes and make sure you're at least in khakis and not jeans. And he's like, I'm supposed to wear regular shoes when I go to the office? And I said, yeah. I said, if that's what everyone else wears, if that's the culture of your corporation. And I told him, I said, just, buy some shoes, keep the shoe box, put them underneath your seat, have a couple of pair of clean socks in there. And, those shoes will last you for 30 years because you only wear them a couple of minutes at a time when you go to the corporate office. But that was a reality because, people forget, and this is classic in construction. If you go into the corporate offices of a construction company and they're a suit organized kind of organization and they're wearing all that stuff. If you go into that company and you get mud all over the carpet and you dirty up the executive area, they're not going to be happy about it. And the gatekeeper to the C-suite, they're not going to be happy about it. And you might actually be told not to come back and visit because you made it dirty. And I know you're thinking, come on, that's not what matters here. This is about perception. This is about connecting with the executive level in a manner that they respond to. So it's not about whether or not we think we should be able to wear our boots. It's whether or not the people that we're working with will see us as valuable assets in the running of the business. And to do that, if you need to walk the way they do and talk the way they do and dress the way they do in order for them to see you, then that's what you need to do. Now, there could be a few folks right now saying, Regina, I don't want to do that. That is A-okay. Because you know what? Not everybody wants to get to the C-suite, and that's totally fine. And the rest I'm going to talk about in this program, you can still utilize to be the best influencer you can be, even if you don't want to get an actual, executive position within the company. Because being a great influencer and having strong connections to the human element to be able to talk to everyone, whether it is a laborer, whether it is the male person in your organization, whether or not it is the executives, it's your customers, it's your subcontractors, it's your suppliers, whoever, you want to be able to talk to them in a way that you can communicate and be effective in the job that you're doing. So quickly, let's remember, leadership is not hitting people over the head. That's assault, not leadership. Now, that's pretty funny because historically in the safety world, we kind of jammed safety down people's throats. We didn't lead them. We hit them in the head with safety. So we actually weren't even doing what we needed to do to be the safest organization and to be the best safety professional we could be. So we need to think about leading and influencing more than anything. So I'm going to talk about 6 types of power. And this power exists in the executive world. It exists in Boy Scout troops. It exists at your church, at your volunteer organization. It might exist in the cells within the organization that you work with in manufacturing. It might exist in the subcontractors. It might exist in your family. It's everywhere. And so I chose some old school pictures here to kind of give you a connection point. And that is, and by the way, this is 6 examples of the types of power that generally exist in most groups of individuals together. You might know about one that has 8 or 5 or 6 or 7 or whatever. This isn't written in stone. This happens to be one that I use. And if you've got one that you like, that's okay too. But let's talk about reward power. So that kind of power is where people can give you a reward, or you could give other people rewards. So I made that Lando because, he had a casino and all that kind of stuff. The one that was really easy to pick, though, is coercive power. Those are people in your organization that cause you pain. And that is Darth Vader. We all know it. I always kind of laugh when I teach this class. I particularly when I'm doing it face to face, I'll ask people. I'm like, who's in the room has worked for Darth Vader? And it's interesting because everyone who's worked for Darth Vader, they will always kind of look down and they'll be like, oh, I have. And if the whole class looks down, I realize Darth Vader's actually in the room. And I'm like, okay, let's move along really quickly. So it's very interesting because everyone's like, yeah, I have. And they're all kind of like looking around. Coercive power is a scary place to work. And it's very hard to influence that kind of person. Nobody just went up to Darth Vader and says, hey, I got a great idea. I think you should listen to me. That didn't work that way. Now, reverent power, that's our Yoda. That's the person that inspires you. Hopefully you have someone like that in your workplace, and they can definitely be your mentor. That's somebody that just somehow lightens and brightens your ability. They say things, they do things, they work with people in a way that when you watch it, you're like, wow, that was amazing what they just did there. So reverent power is awesome. I mean, think about it. Little Yoda, come on, he was a little tiny guy, lived on another planet, He had little or no power except for his knowledge, except for his ability to communicate, not even using words in the proper order. Now let's talk about legitimate power. That was Luke. Now, Luke had legitimate power. You can get that by election, you can get it by behavior, you can get it by birth. Now, he had it both by behavior and by birth. He just didn't know the birth part yet. But yeah, his leadership capabilities made him a legitimate leader and influencer because of the way he behaved. Now, lastly, second to last, we've got expert power. Now, I had to use a computer. I had to use a robot for the example of expert power, but they're the ones that have the intellect. They're the ones that really know what's going on. Now, 30, 40 years ago, expert power usually always sat with the engineering groups and companies. But now expert power often sits with another group, and that's IT. If we can't have our computers work, some of you might be challenged with that at this moment going, I can't see what's happening on the screen. There's challenges with our IT systems, with our computers, with our technical stuff. If we don't have that kind of technical power, if you're not the holder of that technical power, you need to find out who does have it, because that individual reigns a lot of power in companies these days. Now, lastly, I want to talk about informational power, and that's our Obi-Wan. And this is institutional knowledge. This is that person that has been around forever. They know everything about the company. They know everything about the type of work we're doing. They understand the processes, the systems, that kind of thing. And if you're working in an organization that has a lot of people like that, they might be heading towards retirement. And as a safety professional, how are we accessing those people? It might be you, actually. How are we thinking about that? And how are we planning for that transfer of knowledge over time? Now, one of the things I'm aware of is that, we have different aged individuals within our organizations and within the safety profession. So I decided, hey, maybe everybody doesn't like Star Wars. So I thought, who else can I do this with? And I went with The Simpsons. Yes, I did. And in that example, Mo, he can give you a reward. He owns a bar. And coercive power. Who is that? Mr. Burns. Oh my gosh, he's so Darth Vader. Reverent power, Yoda. That's Marge. That's Marge, that mom who knows things, and she's steady, and she inspires you to keep on going. Now, Principal Skinner, he was legitimate power. Now, I love this example because if you've ever worked for somebody who has a title or has legitimate power, but it's like Principal Skinner that maybe shouldn't be in the job. Has anybody ever met anybody like that? Yeah, we all have at one point or another in our careers. So legitimate power, just because it's their job, doesn't mean they should be in charge, but they are. And how do we deal with that in our profession? Now we got expert power. So of course we got to go with Lisa there. Now the last one is my favorite one because not everybody knows this character. And this is Groundskeeper Willie. Now, talk about institutional knowledge. Every episode with Groundskeeper Willie in it, you will find out about skeletons in the closet. You will find out about historical information. Willie knows what's going on at the elementary school because he has been there forever. I had a young woman working for me a couple of years ago, and she had to do some leadership stuff for one of her college courses. And her people on her team were like, "Oh, we don't know what to do. Where do we start?" And she just kind of said, "Oh, I know what to do." And so she used this information, but they used Harry Potter because that's what resonated with her and her age group. And they were able to do all of these different things. These types of power structures exist in every organization. They exist in families. They exist everywhere. And the reason we see them in fiction is because they're real and they get transferred into our fictional stories. Now, why do we need to know about types of power? Because as a safety professional, if you want to influence, if you want to get a place at the C-suite, you have to understand where the power sits in the company. Just because someone's a CEO might not mean they make all the decisions. Maybe the CFO does. Maybe the COO does. Who knows? So you have to figure out, where does the power sit in your organization, and how can you leverage power to get what you need? Meaning, do you need to find groundskeeper Willie, who can tell you something about, the way we did things 20 years ago? Do you need to find a Marge who can inspire you when you're having a bad day? Who are those people, and how do they exist in your company? And how can you utilize them to be the best person you can be? Now, how do you influence? Holy cow, so much out there about that. But let me just hit some big topics. And the first one is making sure you're identifying your target, meaning, who is the person you should be talking to? Because it might not be the CEO. It might not be your boss. It might definitely be your boss. It just depends. So one of the things is make sure that when it comes time to putting some information together to say, hey, you know what? We need to buy some new safety equipment. We need to install infrared temperature readers so that we're not taking manual temperature anymore for people coming to work. That's a big expense. Who are you talking to about that? Who is the person who needs to hear that? And how do you present that argument to them so that they see it from their business perspective? What is their style and motivators? What do they need in order to be successful? You go to the CFO right now and you say, I want to buy a bunch of infrared thermometers so that people can just walk by them and we'll know what their temperature is and we'll know if it's safe for them to come to work. Well, that's a big expense. The CFO, he's going to go, can't you just take their temperature normally? Can't they take them at home? They're going to see a different perspective. And so what you have to do is make sure they understand what your perspective is from the safety perspective and how it can be best for the company. Well, if we use this, they'll get in the door a whole lot faster. We'll be able to track people immediately. We don't have to worry about people not taking their temperature and then maybe not telling us the truth later on. We'll get it right on the spot just as they're walking into work every day. So we've got to be ready to create that true argument where it's a good business decision. Now, one of the challenges that I have when I work with people on this is they're like, I've had some problems in the past and, they don't really like my position. They don't really, like where I'm coming from. And I've had to tell people, if you've had a bad experience by taking a safety argument to your executive to try to make a change in how the company operates, if you've had challenges with that in the past, then maybe you need to figure out if you play a part in that. Was it your fault? Did you come in with not good enough data? Did you come in with a lot of hopes and dreams of, let's all hug and work this safety stuff out? Well, that doesn't work with accountants. That doesn't work with engineers and with certain individuals. So make sure that if you've had past experiences, unsuccessfully or successfully, how do you leverage that knowledge so that you can make better decisions going forward? All right, so let's talk about influencing techniques. And that's what we're going to talk about through the rest of the program. Now, influencing techniques, we are talking about logic, inspiration, participation, favor, I got it out of order. Yeah, follow the little dots. Logic, inspiration, participation, uplift, deal, favor, collective, policy, and force. I got to watch my own slides there. So now, just because they show that they're in an order right here, that doesn't mean you have to follow this 9-step system. It's saying there's different ones, but that when you move through the pattern progressively to policy and force at the end, you've got nothing left. And I'm going to explain a little bit more about that as we go in. But let's talk about logic. When would we use a logical influencing position or a logical argument to communicate with someone? When is logic the right way to talk to people? Or more importantly, what kind of people respond to a logical argument? Now, let's stop and think for a second. If you want to create a logical argument where it's about money and dollars and cents, what kind of job title responds to that? It's the accounting group. It's the engineering group. It is the logical thinkers who want you to lay down the details of exactly why you need something. So for those folks, you need to make a logical argument and say, okay, you know what? Here's a cost benefit analysis. It's going to cost us this much to buy the equipment, this much to train them. We're going to have this level of impact on the amount of controlled losses, and we'll make our money back in 3 years. And here's all the data to prove it. That's a logical argument for a logical person. Now, if you were talking to someone who is very entrepreneurial and risk-taking and sees vision and big picture and stuff like that, a logical argument may not work with them. And if that's the case, that's okay, because you've got other ways to influence people depending on how they like to receive information. One of the big challenges here, though, is it can't just be how you send out information. It has to be about how they receive information. Because if you want to be successful, you're going to have to adapt yourself in order to communicate best with them. So let's talk about inspiration. Now we're getting a little in the squishy area, which is one of my favorites, because I like that we can connect as human beings and use humanity and human-based decision-making in order to get connected to each other. I think what's going on in the world right now, the challenge of coronavirus, it is harder and harder to connect with people because in some cases, some of us aren't even seeing people or having, work conversations face to face. And how do we inspire people? How do we connect with people in a way so that they feel good about the work they're doing? So would you use inspiration with Darth Vader? No, you probably wouldn't. Darth is not, he's not going to be inspired. No one ever came up to Darth and says, hey, I've got a great idea. We could win the war. No, that's not going to happen. So inspiration isn't something you would use on someone who's extremely logical or extremely coercive. You would want to use it on someone who wants to feel good about things. So inspiration is where you suggest about something that may happen based on reasoning. And it's more about emotions than it is about logic. And so sometimes, you just want to say to people, hey, I know, let's use this conference as an example. Hey, I know that the virtual conference is really, really different, but, you worked really hard. We put everything virtually. You attended all the programs. You learned a lot of information. It just goes to show that there are options to learn other than just in face-to-face conversations. This is an option for the company to do better and to promote its own virtual learning in order to control costs in the future. Now, that's an argument if you make that with the right people and you inspire people with change and alternative. But again, it only works for certain kind of people. So it's your job to figure out what are the best people to do with it. Now, the only thing that's really critical about inspiration is you do actually need to believe it. When you are trying to inspire someone, you actually need to inspire them in the truest sense of the word. You can do it. Let's go out there and do this great thing. Let's make these changes. Now, some people won't respond to that. A lot of people will. I will. I know personally. Most of the people I know will respond to inspiration because people like to feel good. They like to feel better and they like to feel part of a success and a value. Now, participation. We know this one, but boy, do we forget about it in the safety world. We know that we've told everybody from the get-go, if you involve people in the decision-making and policy writing, if you ask everyone their opinions and the workforce and everything else, if you ask for people's input, you will get more participation. And by having that participation, they will buy into change a whole lot faster. The idea you walk out and you go, hey, we just ordered a bunch of new safety glasses. Here they are. Tell everyone to wear them. They're much better than the old ones. Maybe that's true and maybe it'll work awesome. Or maybe they're going to be like, why don't they ever ask our opinion? And that's a legitimate question. Why not, put together a team of 4 or 5 individuals in the organization and say, here's a bunch of safety glasses. You guys, go out there, figure out which is the right ones, come back to us with 2 choices, 3 choices. And then we make choices based on the feedback and participation of the workforce. That works better for people. And we know that intellectually. It's just that sometimes we get busy, we get tired, we get overworked. A lot of us are that way right now. And if that's the case, then we have to step back and go, you know what? How do I be the best me so I can lead the best way? Now, our next influencing technique is uplift. Now, uplift is kind of like inspiration, but not exactly the same. Uplift is where you focus specifically on an individual and something that they've done well. And so one example would be, hey, last week, I noticed Dave was leading that toolbox talk out by the truck with all the guys, and he was really making sure everyone kept their 6-foot distance. And I was just really, really impressed with that. Hey, Dave, do you think you could be the person in charge of maintaining 6-foot distancing for social learning in the future? Could you do that? And a lot of times Dave's going to say, yeah, I can do it. Thanks for the compliment. Now you got to mean it. This isn't about just saying stuff to say stuff. It's about connecting with people, about finding people's value and making sure that we share that with them. And believe me, I've had a whole bunch of people that go, oh my gosh, Regina, why do I have to tell somebody they did a good job about their job? That's their job. They're getting paid to do it. You don't have to. You can do whatever you want. I'm just offering up alternatives if you haven't been as successful in the past as you want to be. Because the reality is we're not going to change other people. We can only change ourselves. So what are you doing about you to be the best safety professional you could be so that you can protect your workforce. And so that's really what all of this is about, is some self-reflection. Where do you play a part in the success or failure of your safety program, of your career track, of your place in this organization? And some folks, they're like, oh, Regina, it sounds like a little bit of manipulation to me. And my response to that is, don't use ugly words. It's not manipulation. Think about it. I take the time to learn exactly what it is about you, how you learn, how you receive information, how your mind thinks. I learn as much as I can about you as my boss or anyone that I'm working with. And then when it comes time to talk with you, I choose an influencing technique that matches your needs. That's not manipulation. That's respect. That's the distinction here. Don't use this stuff as some sort of trickery. Use it so that you connect better with the people that you are attempting to influence. Now, a deal. Now, we know what this one is. I give you something, you give me something back. And this is great. And sometimes we have to use it in safety. Boy, we're probably using it a lot right now with what's going on in the world today, because we're making all kinds of deals in order to get things done and things shipped and get glass, get protection and get hand sanitizer or whatever else. So there's probably a lot of deals going on. The key with deal is that you want to use it an appropriate amount of time. You don't want the safety person to become the guy who's always making a deal, because then it looks like safety is up for grabs, that everything's negotiable. And as we know, sometimes in safety, it's not always negotiable. Favor. Now, this is my favorite one, because this is half a deal. This is basically where I ask you to give me something. I ask you to do something for me, and that's the end of it. Will you do me a favor and wear your safety glasses? Will you do me a favor and cover me on the Toolbox Talks next week? Will you do me a favor? Now, you can't use this every day, and it doesn't work up, meaning you can't go to Darth Vader and say, hey, Darth, can you do me a favor? He's going to say no. But, hey, we've got some problems with PPE usage on second shift. Can you do me a favor and talk to the guys about it over the next couple of weeks and kind of keep it in the front of their heads? That's a way for you to ask for assistance. It's a way for you to connect with people and with the information you need to share without you dictating. So instead of saying, hey, we got some problems with PPE, you need to talk to the guys. Instead, it can be like, hey, you know what? We've got a lot of changes going on. And if you could just help me out here, do me a favor, help me out. Use whatever language is right for you. But what thing can help you connect with that person so that it isn't that compliance-based conversation we talked about before? Now, use this in moderation. You don't want to become that person that's constantly asking for favors, because eventually they're going to say no. Collective. This is one of my favorites. And the reason is because it is absolutely the most exciting section. And in that, when you figure out what people are thinking, and when you identify a collective person, you will absolutely, it's a game changer. So collective is basically, it's the opposite of what your mom told you when you were little. So remember, you were little and you're like, I want this, or I want to do this. And your mom's like, oh, if everybody was jumping off the bridge, would you jump off a bridge? Collective is basically saying, hey, all the cool kids are jumping off the bridge, and I think we should too. Collective is about utilizing the trust built in crowds so that people can make jumps of decision making. Basically what it is some people want to be leaders, but they don't want to be the very first leader. Some people want to be on the vanguard, want to be on the front, but not the very front. And if you can identify that those people exist around you, the collective, then you can talk to them in a way that makes them feel more comfortable. And so, for example, I had a client years ago, and he was very much the collective, and everyone was having trouble reaching him, connecting with him, because they kept using classic inspiration techniques, and it just wasn't working. And it turned out that this individual wanted to be on the forefront, but not the first one through the door. So once I was able to say, hey, we've got this policy change, but we've already implemented it at the other levels, and it's really popular and the folks really like it, that type of thing. Then all of a sudden they're like, oh, okay, so other people are doing this. Yes. Some people need that. Some people can't make decisions unless they know that, the kind of folks that like best practices. What are the best practices these days? Oh, it's this, and this. That's the industry standard. Okay, that's what we'll go with. Some people are not big risk takers. And so if they're the collective, then you want to identify that that's what they are so that you can talk to them in that manner, and it helps them out. Now, again, not saying that we're lying to them and we're not making stuff up. You go to them and you say, hey, here's industry best practice, and this is how we should change our policies or procedures based on that. But knowing that that person thinks that way, you can make them feel more comfortable with their decision making because you've thought about what their needs are. So policy. Whoa, yikes, policy. Yeah. See, we've only got two left. It's policy and it's force. And those are just not fun. Policy and force are our last two opportunities to influence. And the reality is that if you throw somebody's policy up at them and go, you need to follow this rule, it's the policy. I mean, who wants to do that? If policy drove decision making, if policy was the reason people did what they did, we wouldn't have car crashes and no one would ever get speeding tickets again because everybody would follow the policies. You will go the speed limit, but they don't always do that. So, telling someone you need to be safe because we wrote a new policy, that's lovely, but it might not work because they might not be a real policy-driven individual. Most people aren't. There's only a small percentage of the world that says, I'm going to do it because that's the rule, and that's a reality we need to be ready for because you don't want to use a policy argument on someone who likes to break rules. You don't want to say you can't use a collective on somebody when you're like, hey, everybody else is doing it. And then that person goes, yeah, I don't want to do what everybody else is doing. So you have to understand who you're trying to communicate with so that you can use the right kind of influencing technique. Now, also be aware that you don't necessarily have to say, okay, it's just one thing for this person. You can use a little inspiration with a little collective, you can use some logic followed up by some participation. Whatever works for the people that you're trying to work with is the way that you want to do that. One of the reasons this is so important is if you can show how you're connecting well with the people you're trying to protect, that word will go up. The people in the C-suite will hear about it. They'll hear, hey, so-and-so is doing a great job. Hey, the safety department's really making a difference and the people are really happy with the work that's being done. That's going to make it to the ears of the right people. So we have to learn how to work with all the different people out there and all the different personalities and all the different learning styles in order to be our most successful self. Now, again, you might go, Regina, I don't want to do any of this stuff. That's fine. That's your choice to make. But if you want to make a difference and if you want to move forward, a lot of folks, when I teach this class in a face-to-face way, a lot of folks are like, oh my gosh, I think I might be part of the problem. That's a beautiful thing if we figure that out. And it's great if you can figure out what you need to do to make yourself a better safety professional so that you can lead people even better as we go along. Now, lastly is force. It's just not a good choice. This goes back to Dwight Eisenhower at the beginning. That's not leadership. Hitting someone over the head isn't leadership. Imagine you walk out onto the shop floor and you're like, hey, if you do that one more time, you're fired. Well, what if they don't get fired? What if HR says you don't have the right to fire them? Or what if HR says, well, we had to give them 3 warnings first. That's our policy. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, great. I just threatened someone and now it won't work. Well, how do you talk to that person afterwards? I mean, where do you go after you threaten them or force them to follow a rule? You can't really go back. So it's very, very difficult. You want to use force in emergency situations. You want to use force when it's a big deal. Hey, stop now. That means something. But, hey, you're going to lose your job if I catch you without your safety glasses one more time. There's other ways to connect with people other than threatening their jobs, threatening their livelihood, their ability to feed their family. No one likes to feel threatened in that manner. So going that route doesn't serve the profession well, doesn't serve most of us in our jobs very well. So be careful when you use this and don't use it as, I know that sometimes we get frustrated. I know sometimes it's like, oh, I lost my temper and I went with force or whatever. That's okay. Be humble, be authentic and say, that probably wasn't the best way. Let's talk about the way to get you to follow these safety rules so I can keep you alive. So there's a lot of struggle with how we might need to adapt ourselves to be the best safety professionals we can be. But if your game plan is to get a seat at the C-suite, you have to know how to work with all kinds of personalities. You have to know how to talk with the CEO, and you have to know how to talk with the folks who are digging the ditches, the folks who are, filling boxes that are going to shipping, the folks who are running the technology, the folks who are doing whatever it is that you're protecting. We've got to be able to move in the full direction of communication. We know that influencing leadership, we know that these types of things are some of the best tactics. Maybe tactics isn't the best word. The best skill set to have in order to move forward as a safety professional. The days of this is the rule and you must follow it, and here's a big giant manual, those days are dwindling to our past, and we have to look forward about what's going to be the best for our future. And you have to consider what's the best for you and your future, your job plan, your future, where you're going to work, who you're going to work with, what kind of safety professional you want to be. I want you to think about what you need to do different when you go back to talking with people that you work with, when you start talking with your CEOs, when you start talking with the people you're trying to protect. What are you going to do differently? Look at this list here. What are 5 things that you can think of that you need to change in order to be better at your job and to be the best you can be? I really, really appreciate your time. Thank you.